This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue to look at the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we're joined by Professor Stephen Zunes of the University of San Francisco. He recently published an article in The Progressive headlined, "The U.S. Hypocrisy on Ukraine." Zunes condemns the Russian invasion, but criticizes what he sees as President Biden's hypocrisy. He writes if Biden really believed countries have a right to self-determination, he would not refuse to recognize this right for Western Sahara, as the International Court of Justice in virtually every country on earth has called for, nor would he refuse to support Palestinian self-determination outside the parameters agreed to by their Israeli occupiers. That's Professor Zunes' words. He's written extensively on Western Sahara, which has been occupied by Morocco since 1975. In a few minutes, we're going to turn to an interview I did with a leading Sahrawi human rights defender on Friday, who's been under de facto house arrest since November 2020. But first, we turn to Professor Zunes. His books include Western Sahara, War, Nationalism, and Conflict Resolution. Welcome back to Democracy Now! As we see the Russian invasion of Ukraine play out, Stephen Zunes, talk about why you're talking about Western Sahara.
Well, Trump formally recognized Morocco's illegal annexation of Western Sahara during his final weeks of his presidency. And like a number of impetuous Trump decisions, it was assumed that Biden would reverse it as soon as he came to office, particularly since a bipartisan group of congresspeople, career State Department officials, and allied governments were encouraging to do so. He's refused to do so, however. The United States is virtually the only country in the world, the only country to formally recognize Morocco's illegal annexation. If you look at maps from the United Nations, from Google, from Rand McNally, National Geographic, whatever, they're depicted as two separate countries. U.S. government maps, by contrast, show Western Sahara as part of Morocco, no demarcation between them. So when Biden says that Russia has no right to unilaterally change international boundaries, that countries cannot expand their territory by force, he's certainly correct, but he seems to think it's okay if you're a U.S. ally like Morocco.
So for those who aren't familiar with Africa's last colony, if you can explain very quickly how Morocco occupied Western Sahara.
Well, Morocco seized the territory in 1975 on the verge of its independence from Spain. And Western Sahara, its formal name is the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, has been recognized by well over 80 countries. It's a full member state of the African Union. So what Biden is doing is he's essentially recognizing the conquest of one recognized African state by another at a time when he's speaking sanctimoniously about how the world must unite against Russian aggression because it violates longstanding international legal norms. The International Court of Justice, the United Nations Security Council, the United Nations General Assembly, the Organization for African Unity, all called for withdrawal of Moroccan forces and an act of self-determination such as a referendum. But the United States has quietly supported the occupation ever since 75, and in 2020 made the recognition official.
And talk about why you also, in the same articles, talk about both Palestine and Western Sahara. And then there's a link with Trump pushing Morocco and accepting their power over Western Sahara.
Well, the United States is also the only country in the world that has formally recognized Israel's illegal annexation of Syria's Golan Heights. We've made a de facto recognition of Israel's annexation of Greater East Jerusalem. And since the Trump administration, we have considered the illegal settlements as part of Israel. And so there's a link there, but we're not talking about a whole nation when we're talking about Western Sahara. And what's interesting, and this development just happened last week, we had thought we had scored a great victory when Congress blocked U.S. military cooperation with the repressive armed forces of Morocco until Morocco agreed to find a mutually acceptable political solution to Western Sahara. But the Biden administration just recently claimed that Morocco had done so via their dubious autonomy plan, which denies the people their right to self-determination, as the United Nations World Court has demanded. It rules out independence and makes permanent the occupation. I mean, if Russia conquered 80% of Ukraine and offered some vague form of autonomy under Russian sovereignty, would Biden find that it constitute a mutually acceptable political solution? But this is what U.S. policy is. And again, we are a big outlier here, just as we're trying to lead the world in upholding these international legal norms against the expansion of territory by force.